Welcome to the PTR Perspective special series on EVs and EV charging infrastructure. Today, we'll explore one of the most important transformations in the e-mobility sector. I have with me Rafi Khan, our head of e-mobility research at PTR, and Najd Nasiruddin, the deputy director of client relations in EMEA. And I'm super excited to be shooting this episode with these two. If we take a step back a decade ago, EVs were framed as inevitable, the next big revolution in mobility. But as we turn the page on 2024, that story looks far more complex. Europe faced a particularly difficult year, and in North America, new policies reshaped the market in distinct ways. With the adoption slowing down in some places, consumer sentiment shifting in others, the question really is the EV story as unstoppable as we once believed? At PTR, we believe that to answer this, we need to cut through the noise and focus on the signals to answer this. And we're going to use our latest research on EVs and e-mobility around the world to get through some of those questions. Each region carries its own dynamics, its own challenges, its own opportunities. And in this series, we will explore them one by one. So, if you're from the e-mobility sector or just interested in it, join us as we navigate the realities and see where the e-mobility story is truly headed. Let's jump right into Europe. Rafe, Europe was one of the hardest hit regions during the so-called EV slowdown in 2024. Reduced subsidies in key markets like Germany, high EV price tags, and a weaker consumer confidence kind of slowed the adoption in the region. Apart from these, in your view, what are some of the key drivers that led to this market dip? And maybe also a flavor of how do these vary from one country to the other?
Right. Hi, everyone. And Hassan, as you pointed out correctly, that two factors, which I think are the major reasons for the slowdown, were abrupt withdrawal of subsidies, which happened in multiple countries, including Germany, France, and some other Eastern European countries as well. That's one of the major reasons. Apart from that, I think a lot of cars are overpriced or are not competitive enough when we see other competition entering the market, such as Chinese companies, which have very low priced EVs. So these are the two major reasons I would say, um, that the price parity not there between EVs and ICEs, and the withdrawal of subsidies from different governments, which resulted in this slowdown. Apart from that, I think the macroeconomic factors in European countries, such as high interest rates and also increased inflation in many countries, that also reduced the purchasing power of the normal consumers or normal buyers, which actually uh, resulted in a slowdown of the EV industry. However, I would like to clarify that the whole of Europe was not did not experience a slowdown. There were countries which actually did very well during 2024 as well. So
Mhm.
countries like UK, Netherlands, Portugal, Denmark, they did a decent amount of sales and they had a positive growth in 2024. But on the other hand, countries like Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, and as well as Finland and France, there was a slowdown that was seen, and that particularly was because of reduced incentives or difficult macroeconomic indicators did not support growth in those countries. With this, I would also ask Najat on her experience on visiting different conferences in Europe, especially the one she recently visited, Smarter E. So, Najat, based on your discussion at these events, how do you see the market sentiment at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Ravi. A very interesting question. So Smarter, yeah, I attended a few months ago in 2025. I could already say that, let's say, the companies in this sector are more relaxed than 2024. That's a given. They are, let's say, more relaxed to spending, even in the way they're representing themselves. There were a lot of different conversations. Also, regarding what you just mentioned, the countries that were hit by these like changes in the subsidiaries and so on, and how the OEMs actually dealt with it. And very interesting, like some OEMs, for example, you can see like BMW or, for example, Mercedes, they don't really, their customers are not really price sensitive. So they just delayed the launch of few new products. Some, and the majority, of course, they reduced their volumes of production. And some, like Tesla, for example, they provided their own incentives, their own discounts. So that happened. And one thing that's for sure, I saw a lot of Chinese players there. And anyway, like it's still like the market is there's still kind of slow, but it's picking up. Like for example, tomorrow I'm going to ICNC. I see a lot of new faces that are joining and so on. So people are coming back to these conferences. But since you mentioned Smarter E, as I mentioned, I saw a lot of Chinese players there, and that's something I wanted to ask you in this podcast. Seeing that, let's say, the European OEMs, the AV manufacturers, and so on, they had a bit of a slowdown of electrification plans change and so on, while the Chinese manufacturers or the Chinese players, they're entering the market, they're strong, they're very competitive. So what's like, how do you see this affecting the market? How is this competition? Do you think, how will EU respond to this type of competition and market dynamic?
Sure. Yeah, Chinese competition is real, and we already see EU responding with tariffs and additional additional like barriers to entry for Chinese OEMs. But to be honest, this could work in the short term, but in the long term, EU and EV OEMs in Europe need to find a better solution or a solution that is much more long lasting. So,
Mm,
in my opinion, solutions such as providing value added services alongside what they already do, which is to manufacture vehicles, that could be a good way to counter the Chinese competition because it's really difficult for European players to compete with China on pricing because they are very low priced right now. So
mm,
value added services could be in the form of since we know that the residual value of EVs is not that great, and there could be improvements done on that. So that could be a pain point that EV OEMs in Europe can answer by probably giving buyback program options after a few years of EVs being used. Similarly, I think at the same time, the automobile manufacturers in Europe, they need to start introducing cheaper models too, so that they can also cater to the big market of people who would want cheap vehicles or vehicles which are closer to their ICE counterparts. So
mm.
that I think these two ways could be an effective way to counter the competition that Europe is currently facing from Chinese manufacturers.
Um,
Um,
Rafe, shifting back a little bit towards the market, it seemed like both Najid and you are talking about recovery signals, right? So based on these recovery signals today, do you believe that the EV adoption trajectory that now Europe is back on will sustain itself? How do you see kind of the next 12 to 40 to 24 months, like the next 1 to 2 years period? What are the potential disruptors that could alter the market path from this recovery?
Right. So I think the market is back on track, at least in the major economies where we saw a slowdown last year. There is recovery. So Germany is doing very well. France is doing very well as well. UK did not slow down, and it is doing better than a lot of expectations that people had from UK. So this is almost 50% of the European market. So things are back on track. Which is a good sign. Um, but I think there are still some risks associated, particularly around the targets that different countries have already announced. for 2030 or 2035. If they don't backtrack on that, that's going to be a good positive indicator. But if they backtrack, that's going to be a negative indicator for that market. And apart from that, AFIR regulations, that's a positive sign that was introduced in the past few years by the European Commission. Um, However, a slower rollout of those plans can be a barrier, which should be avoided, I think. And then there are other macroeconomic factors, such as the war going on between Ukraine and Russia. If that ends early, I think that's going to be a good win for everyone, for every industry in Europe in general. So these are some risks. If the correct mitigation is there, and we don't see the negative side of these factors happening, we think that the market would sustain a positive and healthy growth in the future.
I mean, talking about the positive outlook of the market, right? I feel that the policies and the targets which are going to be set up would be the biggest thing, right? Kind of the 2030 targets, and then locking the OEMs into steadily higher EV shares, like regardless of the consumer volatility, might kind of induce this certainty for both consumers as well as kind of the private operators as well. The other thing that I feel still continues to go in the favor of EV adoption is the battery pack prices, right? Like they fell
Mhm.
20% in 2024. They're on the track to decline further as well. And that is going to help with the point that you raised earlier about, cheaper EV models. They're going to be necessary for the adoption. And I think lastly, I feel the one of the big segments is the corporate fleets, right? Leasing, corporate fleets, they're still the growth engine, until kind of the affordability improves and individual consumers are also massively buying it. Like the overall total cost of ownership, and then developing the secondary markets, as you said, like, all of these elements are extremely important to continue this growth in the EV adoption.
Actually, since you mentioned that corporate fleets and so on, Rafi, like you've been doing a lot of research for e-mobility. A lot of our customers asked you to segment a lot of the data and so on. So I wanted to ask, like, there's of course different types, different segments of EVs. There is the and the currently EU is coming back, and I want to know, like, looking at these segmentations, whether it's smart fleets pushed by, I don't know, clean air rules, or luxurious fleets like pushing innovation and so on, which segment for electric vehicles do you see like pushing back Europe's comeback to the market?
Right. I think, as Hassan mentioned as well, corporate fleets, that's one major category.
Mm.
And along with that, the the other segment, which is commercial vehicle segment, which has trucks, buses, LCVs, because I think these two segments are the ones that need to be targeted more, and a lot of countries are doing that as well. Germany, in their new incentive, particularly mentions about corporate fleets as well. So these two segments are the easiest targets because they can be regulated and directed very much easily compared to an individual consumer who's going to buy an EV. To change their mindset, EV subsidies were doing a good job, but that's not the only thing that's going to influence. So corporate fleets and commercial fleets, they're easy to regulate, and targeting them at this point of time makes more sense. And once there is momentum, individual consumers would drive onto this bandwagon as well, and then we would see uh, a very quick growth in electrification. So electrification rates right now in Europe are close to 20%, but with
Mhm.
corporate fleets and commercial fleets electrified more in the coming future, we can see this percentage exponentially increasing.
Mm. Right, very, very interesting points that you raised. But and then I have one more question to Hassan. Like you're very much involved in these strategy related discussions with the customers, with everyone, with our partners. And we've talked a lot in this podcast about, let's say, the Chinese new players, all these changes in the market. Now, for our clients, for everyone watching, what do you advise, or how, like strategically, what should the Europeans EV charger manufacturers do to remain competitive in this market with all of these changes?
Very valid question. I mean, I think about this, right? If I was to put myself in the shoes of European suppliers, right, and think about go-to-market strategy, I strongly think that the differentiation needs to go beyond the pricing part. Like Chinese competition is the strongest in terms of pricing. So instead of really competing with pricing, my thought process around this is that there are three areas where European suppliers can, try to differentiate. The first one is reliability and quality. European market really values dependable, compliant infrastructure. So meeting the standards set by regulations like AFIR, for example, is extremely important and can be a differentiator, if you're there in the market and understand these really well. The second one is ecosystem partnerships, aligning with other ecosystem players, like utilities, for example, like other fleet operators, for example, with leasing providers, utilizing your local presence and years of relationships, I think can really provide these sticky long-term revenue streams. I already see some players making good moves in doing that. For example, ChargePoint and Eaton announced a partnership for high speed EV chargers, right? And the last one is that I still believe that there are pockets of opportunities which are underserved. There was a lot of focus on Western Europe and kind of Northwestern Europe in terms of EV charging infrastructure and EV adoption. But I feel that to some degree, Southern and Eastern Europe still remains underserved. So suppliers who make these regions within Europe a priority for their go-to-market strategy as well will have some form of an early mover advantage as well. So I think these three elements, like ultimately the European suppliers really need to anchor themselves as the trusted partners in a policy driven market rather than competing on price alone. So this is my opinion on that.
Makes total sense. At the end, like you have to show your value in the best way you can do that. Thank you. That's very, very interesting insights from both of you. Thank you very much. And I'll actually use these insights with my clients, so I'm gonna meet a bunch of them this week. And yeah, we go to the next episode on North America, I believe, right?
Yeah, let's do that.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.